Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Penguin Random House Book and Author Festival, hosted by Library Journal and School Library Journal. My name is Ashley Rayner. I manage the Greater Grand Crossing branch of the Chicago Public Library, and I'll be moderating the genre-busting thriller session. But first, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and it will be available in the virtual environment for 3 months. If you have a question for our speakers, click on the Q&A icon at the bottom. We'll try to save some time at the end for audience questions. We do not have chat enabled, but near the end of the session, we will be sending you a PDF with details about all of today's authors through the chat window. Live captioning is available. You can either display a subtitle or show the transcript, and you can save the transcript at any time. Note that while the recording will include subtitles, the transcript will not be available on the recording. If you prefer to listen to the audio via a phone, click audio settings to access a dial-in number. Please join us on Twitter with the hashtag PRHBookFest. I am so excited today to introduce our authors. The first is Nekesa Afia, Dead Girls, a debut novelist who takes readers back to 1920s Harlem from Berkeley Publishing. Dead of Winter by Stephen Mack Jones, his third August Snow novel from Soho Crime. Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, the best-selling author of Mexican Gothic, who now turns her brilliant talents from speculative fiction to noir by Del Rey. And Bathhouse by P.J. Vernon, his second novel after his flashy debut, When You Find Me by Doubleday. Well, hello, everyone. Oh, there we go. So I have some questions that I put together. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry. I'm so excited to go. I'm like, not even waiting for people to show up. So I have some questions about these books, which I loved, and I was scared during all of them. They were so fabulous. My first question is for PJ with his book Bathhouse. I had to put this book down multiple times because I was so scared. That's not an exaggeration. What's your secret to ratcheting up tension in a way that keeps readers going, even when they're not sure they want to find out what's next?
I appreciate that so much. That's some incredible praise. And in that one specific example, I'm totally okay with readers putting my book down to maybe take a breath of air. So thank you for it. I think the short answer for me is to keep readers uncomfortable. I think uncomfortable readers, at least when I'm uncomfortable as a reader, that's what keeps me turning pages, particularly when I am rooting for a character, when I care about what's going on. And the only way I can kind of relieve that feeling of discomfort is to find out what's coming next, even though, as you say in your question, it might be a little bit painful or anxiety inducing to do so. I think, tension's the lifeblood of every story, whether it's a thriller or a children's picture book. But it's also kind of, a dynamic, kinetic thing, and it hinges on what's at stake for a character in any given moment, and of course the larger the stakes, the more tension you wind up having on the page. So an example that I use when I'm talking to folks is sort of like an airplane engine failure. If in Act 1 the airplane the engine fails on the runway, well, what's at stake, right? Like a business trip might be delayed or what have you. But if in Act 3 it fails in the air, that's a totally different situation. Now we've got lives at stake. So, also being very deliberate about constantly escalating those stakes as you move forward through the narrative. I think in Bathhouse specifically, it was a bit of a challenge, actually, because right from the first chapter, we establish what counts as dangerous in the story world, which is the main character, Oliver, is almost strangled to death in a bathhouse where he's there sort of on the cusp of cheating on his partner. So we've got his relationship and his life at stake. And so figuring out how I could keep that up after that was a huge challenge. Of course, there's also all sorts of small ways you can keep sustain and cultivate tension. If a character is hungry, make sure they don't have food, or if they need to take a bath, the hot water's out, or maybe they're afraid of the dark, so all the bulbs are burnt out or what have you. So always just asking myself, how can I make this worse for the character is a good rule of thumb, I think.
Oh, that is amazing. Similarly, with Nekesa Afia's book, Dead Girls, a lot of the chapters end in these little cliffhangers. And it's very like scary at that point. How did you decide to use this technique? And how did you determine when and where to use it?
Uh, this is not a great answer, but it's kind of about the vibes of like the chapter and what's going on. So I kind of just tried to find like the most tense thing, or try to like foreshadow something at the end of the chapter, and like that's gonna like keep readers to want to keep reading, and then like that kind of also helps me keep writing, because also I want to find out what's happening, because I don't really plan. I'm like, oh, what's gonna happen next? Guess I've just trained myself into doing more work. So yeah, so it's just like trying to find like the best place to stop, and usually like the best place to stop isn't actually where you think it is. It's just kind of ending so that the reader goes, wait, what? Gotta keep reading.
I never thought about that, the idea of like it's not where you think it's going to be. That's really interesting. This question is for Stephen. I did not know this until I started reading it. Hello. But this book is part 3 in a series. I wouldn't have really, I felt like I was able to jump right in. There was a couple of hints about things that had happened, but I didn't really feel like I was missing anything. What was your method in creating an accessible setting for those like me who were new to the series?
Well, I've tried to contain each story in its own. I don't want it to be dependent on the previous book, just so that a reader jumping in on book 2 or book 3 can enjoy the ride and possibly have their curiosity piqued enough so that they do go back to the first, second, and perhaps the third. But I want the stories to be independent, and I think the most consistent thing throughout the series is the character of Detroit, the city of Detroit, and how my characters interact with that city. Each city has its own personality. Chicago has its own personality. Toronto, every city has its own distinct personality. And I want to convey that in these books, primarily because I think Detroit has been given short shrift over the years. It's been reduced to a shorthand of sparks flying on an auto assembly line, black versus white, rich versus poor. And there's so much more here that is enriching. So those are the things that I want to contain in each book.
And I think it's really easy to tell if you're from a city and the person who's writing it has not done their research. It's very obvious to tell. It's easy to tell because it happens to me all the time in books.
Yes.
This question is for Silvia Moreno-Garcia. The action in Velvet Was the Night is kind of tempered behind a lot of mundane situations. So the main character, Maite, is running around investigating a mystery, but she's also got to make sure she feeds her neighbor's cat. One of the other characters, Elvis, is keeping his rituals of learning a new word every day, even when he's like gonna go like beat up people. And the stakeouts, it doesn't matter what medium you're in, stakeouts are always boring. What is your goal behind keeping characters grounded, even as life seems to get more and more dangerous for them?
Yeah, well, Velvet Was a Night takes place in Mexico City in 1971, in June of 1971. And this was a time when government activists were being arrested and tortured by the Mexican government. So they would send people to beat left-wing activists and students. And the government had been supported by the CIA in these activities because they were anti-communist. So we opened the novel with a group that is called the HAUS, and this was a real group, a paramilitary group that attacks a group of peaceful demonstrators and kills several of them. This is something that really happened. The government had killed demonstrators before in 1968 at Tlatelolco, but they had used the military. After that incident, because it got a lot of press, they organized this new group of basically thugs for hire, which was called the HAUS. And this is the group that we opened the novel with. When you're talking about government spying, about surveillance, that evokes images of James Bond. And I was watching a James Bond movie last night. I was watching Goldfinger. It's very exciting. Surveillance in the real world and this kind of spying is very mundane. You are spending hours basically sitting in a car outside somebody's home, peeing in a bottle, or you're listening to their phone calls, to their very boring phone calls, trying to see if you can find something juicy. But the other thing that is mundane are the beatings, the torture, and the murder. And this sounds awful, but violence is like a bureaucracy. So for the people doing the tortures and the beatings, everything is very normal and everything is very chill. And you have people torturing students and they're talking about changing the radio station while beating someone. And then there's the rest of the world and society. So although people in Mexico are aware of what is going on in Mexico, and it varies depending on their social class, how much they worry or they care about what is happening, life goes on. So a lot of times people fantasize and they think, if I was faced with an unjust situation, I would start a rebellion. Well, there were guerrilla groups in Mexico at this time because of what was happening. But the truth of the matter is that most people, they kept going from their job to 9 to 5. And if you read the newspapers and the magazines of the day, what is astonishing is how normal life is in Mexico and how much nobody really cares. So there's a sort of horrific mundanity about everything that is happening in Mexico and Latin America at the time, because the CIA is helping topple governments, the governments are attacking their own people, murderous dictators are being installed in power, but life proceeds just as usual. So I wanted to reflect some of that in the novel. So it's what I call the horrific mundanity.
And I think that the mundanity of it just makes it so much more like, oh yeah, we're just going about our lives as this is going on. That is fascinating. My next question is for Nekesa. In your historical note, you mentioned that you could have set your novel in modern times, but you were fascinated by, and I'm quoting you, this period of creativity, change, and growth. Can you elaborate on what fascinated you and how you decided to use the 1920s as your setting?
Yeah, okay. So I love the 1920s. I love basically not basically everything about it because, you know, there's systemic racism and the KKK was back and it wasn't a great time, generally speaking. But then there's like the art and the music and like all the dance styles and the culture and like everything that Black people were creating back then. Just the birth of the Harlem Renaissance was absolutely everything. And I really wanted to explore that more and I really wanted to go through it more. And I really just wanted to like dive through in the research. So that's why I said in the 1920s. I also really love like the fashion, the music, the clothes, everything. I just think it was such an interesting time where like white women were getting the vote and this like things were changing, but then like Black culture is staying pretty much the same. Black women were still expected to be in the house. They were still expected to be mothers and wives, and they're supposed to like give themselves to other people and just like support and care for other people. And that's it. So I really wanted to care to explore that too. So like I could have said it now and it would have been basically the same, but I don't think it would have been as good.
Yeah, and I have to confess, I hate history in high school. And so like both your novel and Sylvia's novel made me want to do research on those times because I just don't know. Like I just don't know anything about it. So I think that using those as backgrounds is such a fascinating way to like engage people in something they're not familiar with. So I have a question for PJ now. Your book really captured how technology we use every day can be used in a sinister way. What's the scariest thing for you about technology? And were you able to use it in this book?
So my honest answer here is so like low stakes and laughable. And I guess it's technically in the book. The scariest thing for me are read receipts. So like if someone sees that I've seen their text message or DM or whatever, and I'm not ready to reply to it yet, like that's for whatever reason, a tremendous source of personal anxiety for me. So that's my answer in the book. I certainly, the most obvious, so I use a hookup app, Meat Locker, which is sort of this stand-in for an app like Grindr, which for any folks tuning in who might not be familiar is a hookup app marketed towards for gay men or those who identify that way. And it sort of reads how close different users are to each other as a measure of like the ease in which you could get together for some sort of, you know, predetermined activity. And, you know, back in the day, and so it'll literally say like, oh, you're 2 miles away, or PJ's 300 feet away, or PJ's in the next room over, and you didn't know he was there. So it was just sort of like low-hanging fruit, so to speak, for like a call is coming from inside the house moment on the one hand. And then I draw a lot of inspiration just from the way, you know, technology, I get caught by technology all the time. So for example, my partner Barry and I were in a long distance relationship for a couple of years. And at some point, Facebook started tagging like where you sent your message from. And so I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm just got done with lunch. I had a salad at Whole Foods. It was really good. And then he's like, well, you sent the message from Wendy's. And I was like, oh, okay, well, all right, I guess I'm caught. Or I'm like the doorbell cam, I'm on camera, you know, slipping, like trying to grab an Uber, you know, slipping on ice to run out for like a waiting car. So just, you know, it's technology makes our lives easy, and to be constantly distrustful of it or incredulous is so exhausting that so many of us don't do it. And of course, you know, people who are unscrupulous can take advantage of that quite readily. So just a bunch of low stakes random examples of me doing stupid stuff and getting caught. I'm like, this should be in a thriller, but with murder.
But I think it's accessible because we all have those little things that we end up caught up with, being at Wendy's instead of Whole Foods. Like that's very relatable. And why not escalate it to murder? Why not? This question that I have next is for Stephen. We were talking about this earlier. I haven't spent a lot of time in Detroit. There's no reason. It just hasn't happened yet. But after reading about all the locations and the restaurants in dead of winter, I feel like I know the city very well. How do you go about building a location that almost becomes a character itself?
Well, it starts with living in a place for over 40 years, which I've done. I've had a career in advertising, marketing, communications, a family. I've worked in the city proper, the suburbs. I've seen things which I never imagined I would see. And I've seen things that emerged that I had long hoped to see for this city. And when you step back from it all and you're writing about people interacting with the city that you've interacted, you want to see the city through their eyes. How do they feel about it? What are their interactions? What are their pet peeves? Where is their sense of pride? And as I mentioned before, Detroit has always had a lot of baggage to carry. There's a lot of, outside of Detroit, you can read the news, you can watch it on TV, and every time Detroit is brought up, there's almost this sanctimonious pity that people have in the media for this city. And they're really focusing on perhaps 1/20th of what this city is about. And for me, it's the series is a chance to communicate with readers, not stepping on a political or sociological soapbox, but it's an opportunity for me to say, hey, we've got this, that, the other. And I was very fortunate to get a email through, my website. That's a term that I never thought I'd use for myself. But I got an email from a reader in Australia. And this gentleman said he enjoyed the book, but he also said, well, Detroit's on my bucket list now, mate. And I thought, whoa, that is really cool. So, changes in perception.
Oh my, it's so funny because we're just talking about how technology can be bad, but sometimes it's good. Occasionally, maybe. My next question is for Silvia. The main character, Maite, she is such a dreamy character. She has this love of romance comics, which I mean, I know like there's manga now, but I have never really read romance comics. So how did you put this dreamer head in the cloud? To me, she's a kind of a dreamer head in the clouds. How did you put her, or why did you decide to put her into such a realistic and even brutal setting?
Yes, I wanted to create a contrast between two very different genres. At this time in Mexico, romance comic books are still very popular. There were quite a bit of romance comic books still left in the United States at this time, but in Mexico it was a huge deal. Lágrimas y Risas sold thousands of issues every week. And there was one of the main differences between American and Mexican comic books is that in Mexican comic books, it was completely escapist. Nobody dealt with any kind of social issues or contemporary material, even if the stories were set in contemporary times. What I mean about that is that in American comic books, you might get a young woman struggling with women's lives issues. Still in a very conservative way. She would obviously get married at the end or find a way to maybe complete her degree and be happy, but it was mixed into the issues. In Mexico, it wasn't. It's complete escapism. Like it's an escape into unreality. And there was an interview that the head of Televisa, which was the largest and still is the most important TV network in Mexico, and he talked about television in Mexico. And what he said, and I'm quoting him, is that soap operas are meant for, quote unquote, a fucked up social class that will never cease to be fucked up. So what I wanted to do was to juxtapose that genre, the romance novel, the romance comic book, the romance soap opera, which is seen as an escapism for the middle class, with the noir, with the novela negra, allowing no escape, essentially. And around this time is the emergence of the noir, of the novela negra in Mexico, because the first one in this category is published in 1968 and is called El Complot Mongol in Mexico. So what I wanted to do is to create a clash between two very different types of pulp fiction.
That is so cool. I really want to. I'm gonna have to look and see if I can find any, because I would love to see what that looks like, especially compared to the comics. I mean, I read a lot of comics now, so to see what it would look like now would be so interesting. PJ, my Oliver, the main character of your book, is an unreliable narrator, it was such a big trend, and I think it's still something that we see a lot of. He makes poor decisions. I'm going to be kind and say he makes some poor decisions over the course of the book. How are you able to make him sympathetic despite all his shortcomings, all the stuff he does?
Yeah, good decision making doesn't make for great thrillers, I feel like, very frequently. But I certainly think that I think he is sympathetic exactly because of all of those poor decisions he's making. I think barring like, a few specific examples, all of us, do engage in sympathetic behavior at times, and we engage in unsympathetic behavior at times. So I feel like it's way more important to me as a reader, and what I hope I do with characters like Oliver is to engender empathy for them. Making sure readers care about them. Do they relate to them? Have, maybe the reader hasn't wandered into a bathhouse to cheat on their partner, and anything like that, but certainly they might relate to the circumstances of why the character's there, or he's assaulted physically in this very vulnerable place, and if you've been a victim of anything like that, whether it's physical or emotional or whatever else, there's an incredible amount of shame to that. You feel and unjustifiably, but you feel very embarrassed, humiliated, weak. You've had control removed from you. And so, all of those sorts of things are very, very relatable to me. I think of like that, the Alfred Hitchcock bomb under the table example to illustrate suspense. It matters that we care, that people of who is sitting around that table when the bomb goes off. And that doesn't mean they necessarily have to be sympathetic. So I think about like, addiction, which is something that's interrogated a lot in the novel as well. Someone who has an addiction might not be engaged in something sympathetic when they're consuming those drugs, but that person's worthy of empathy. And there's so many things about that person that I'm sure we would all relate to when it comes to what brought them to this specific point. And we care. We want them to save themselves. So I hope readers want Oliver to save Oliver and want to root for him in that way. I think right off the bat, again, he's cheating at the start of the novel, which is extraordinarily unsympathetic for a lot of folks, but then immediately endures this attack, and readers have to confront this question, which is, lots of people cheat, but do they deserve, to die for it right off the bat? And that's a question that, continues to be explored. So I think he's sympathetic. But I also, it's a great genre, and they just want a good story with engaging characters, and sympathy, comes occasionally, and that's great.
I'm not saying you necessarily have to be sympathetic, but I know some people are like, I can't, unless I can identify with this person, I can't read or I can't enjoy. And I'm like, well, then what do you read? Because like, there's so much to not like. That's how you learn about new things, right? Like you read stuff that you don't have perspective of. So that's fascinating. I just wanted to remind our viewers, if you guys have any questions or anything you want to ask, please put it in the Q&A section, and we'll probably have some time to get to them. Anyway, on to the next question. This one is for Stephen. The action in it's a very cinematic book, Dead of Winter, to me. If a lot of the action is very easy to see. And that part is great. But I also really enjoy the interactions between August, who's the main character, and all the characters in his life. How do you go about developing dialogue that feels real and natural?
That's a great question. And my answer comes from having written several plays that, fortunately for me, 3 were actually produced. And that learning how to listen to the way people speak, different people, different cadences, different nationalities, ethnicities. There is the old thing of, and my wife asked me about this the other day, and it just threw me off. She said, why is it sometimes you speak in a very professional manner, and then when you're around so-and-so, you kind of, and she used the term, you kind of go home. And, home meaning just speaking in vernacular. And the term for that, which I had to learn from my son, was code switching. And code switching is very important for me as a writer, because it allows me to learn the different ways people speak, the different manners that they use to communicate an idea, a thought, a feeling. Someone may speak with a Southern cadence, a simple Southern cadence. But but regardless of the simplicity on the surface, if you're listening, there's a great depth to what they're saying, a gravitas to what they're saying. So I think most writers, the writers that we have here, I think they may suffer from, including myself, I think they may suffer from controllable schizophrenia, because we're speaking in other voices with other characters. And the key is empathy. Even with a bad guy, a villain, trying to find enough humanity in that bad character that they appear human and not a cutout, not a stereotype. So that's, I hope I answered the question.
I was trying to be on mute so I could, listen and not distract you with anything. Because I'm like, in the background. But code switching, it's so funny to put a word to that, because I think for a lot of people, we've been doing that our whole lives, and we didn't know there was a term for it. I like going home, though. I think I'm going to co-opt that from your wife. That sounds amazing. This next question is for Nekesa. So the main character, Louise, who is a lot of fun. She loves to go dancing. She loves to drink. She's just out having a good time until some things happen. She works with a policeman at the time to investigate a series of murder. Did you research police techniques at the time? I'm sure it wasn't like Law and Order. That's what I think of when I think of police techniques. How has police work changed between then and now?
Okay, so I like researched like I don't want to say half-assed my research, but I did it in a different way. So Louise is totally new to this world, so I wanted to kind of take it like I'm totally new to this world too. So I read a bunch of old crime novels and I watched a lot of old crime movies, and honestly, any excuse to watch a classic movie is gonna happen in my house. So there we go. And crime solving 100 years ago and crime solving now is like totally different. Obviously, like even in like 1921, they didn't have like blood DNA, so like you can like take the DNA from a crime scene. Even things like closed caption like cameras, those aren't around. So 100 years ago, it's a lot of like pounding the pavement and talking to people and like trying to put together a timeline, and then like you have to hope that these people aren't lying to you because there's no way to verify it. Like you can't just like whip out your phone and be like, oh yes, you were on Facebook at 3:25 p.m. So obviously you weren't doing this crime, you're on Facebook. So she just kind of has to go through and like use her gut instincts, which aren't very good because she's kind of a mess. And she just has to like kind of like suss out like what's going on and like listen to all these stories and like find out which one's true and which one's false. And yeah.
I'm nosy. What movies did you watch? What old movies did you watch?
Oh, I was watching a lot of Humphrey Bogart. So I learned that like I love The Big Sleep, The Maltese Falcon. Like I'm due to like rewatch like all of those. And watching like him do it, I learned that I actually love Humphrey Bogart a lot. So that's something that was new to me. But yeah, and just like seeing how like they were written and just seeing like how they were like transposed to screen really helped too.
Makes me think of like Double Indemnity. That's one of my favorite, but that's more noir, I guess. But it's such a good movie. Speaking of historical information, Sylvia, like I said, this novel, Velvet Was a Night, is about a period of time that I don't know a lot about, and I bet a lot of Americans won't know a lot about either. What kind of research did you do to make your novel accurate? Where did you go to find out all the little details that make this novel so engaging?
One of the important components of the novel is music. My parents work in radio. My grandfather was a radio announcer too, so we were all a radio family. So I know a lot about music and I know about radio. I grew up in that environment. But for this novel, and my first novel, Signal to Noise, was a lot about radio and about music. I first was reluctant to go back to music as an element because I had used it before. But the more I worked through the book, the more I realized that political repression was happening, but musical repression was also happening at the time and was also another big element of what was going on in the country. So I incorporated music, and that meant looking at some music that I hadn't listened to in a long time, or that I hadn't cared for, in the beginning when I was younger. My father's musical taste veered in a different direction, and so my musical taste also veered in a different direction than what was maybe most popular at the time in Mexico, which were cover bands of American songs and that sort of work. So it was a lot. There was a lot of music involved in listening to music. The rest is, lots of books, newspapers, magazines, archival work. So it's a photocopy. Can't see it very well, but this is an ad that ran in June of 1971 in a major newspaper. It's the Union of Electricians saying happy birthday to Luis Echeverria and telling him that he's a wonderful president. This is a couple of weeks after he has ordered that the demonstrators be attacked and massacred. So this is running in a major newspaper. So this is the kind of coverage that you're seeing. There are some newspapers that are that are kind of saying, there are hawks, this was government orchestrated, that kind of stuff. But you also see in the mainstream people calling the demonstrators commie bastards, American supporters, destabilizators, all kinds of different words, and saying they deserved it, they started it, they brought weapons, all that kind of stuff. So you see that, and so that's some of the work that I was looking at, reading newspapers, reading headlines, and also reading the archives that now have been released about what really happened in the time period. So all the murders and repression that were happening, testimony of people who were tortured, who were, under surveillance in that time period. So all of that informs the novel. But ultimately, this is, a fictional novel. It is pulp fiction in itself, responding to a pulp fiction genre using a real context.
Well, you hold up a photocopy of, it looks like microfilm, and all the librarians in the group I know perked. I know I did. I was like, oh, I know what that looks like. That is so cool. Thank you for sharing that with us. Those are all the questions that I had, but we've got some in the question and answers, and I'm just going to go through. We've got a little bit of time, so I'm just going to go through and put you right back on the spot, Silvia. The first question says, loved Mexican Gothic. Can't wait to read. That was another one I had to put down a couple of times because I got scared. Cannot wait to read Velvet Was the Night. How do you come up with the ideas for your books, and what's next?
Thank you. What's next is my next novel was just delivered this month. It's called The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. It's set in 19th century Mexico in the southern part of the peninsula, which at that point is undergoing a really big political conflict. And so it takes place in that time period. And after that, I still have another novel under contract. I haven't told my publisher what it's going to be, and I haven't quite decided what it's exactly going to be because I have been working on two different things, but it will probably be another speculative work, maybe horror. So.
Gosh, that's so cool. Okay, so the next question is for Nekesa. They wonder, the question asker wonders if you're familiar with the Paragon Hotel by L. Fay, set in the 1920s, though the main character flees Harlem and ends up in Oregon. Fascinating history. Oh, maybe that's not a question, but.
I have not. I should pick that up. I've seen it around a little. But yeah, I should definitely write that down and check it out. Thank you so much.
Let me add that to my list of books to read. I'll stay with you, Nekesa. Someone asked if Dead Girl is going to be a standalone or will there be a sequel? I can't wait to read it. I already love Lou.
Yes, thanks for asking. There's going to be a sequel. It is coming out in next year, so early 2021, and I've been working really hard on it, and I'm really, really excited to share it with you guys.
That is very cool. Back to Silvia. This question says, I love the world, culture, and character in the Gods of Jade and Shadow. Would you ever consider jumping back into that story?
I don't I don't like going back to stories because I normally get really interested in something brand new and I get very bored with what I did before. And so I want to switch to something completely different. So even with Velvet Was a Night, my previous noir was called Untamed Shore, and that was set in 1979 in Mexico, and in a small village in Baja California. And it's very different in tone to Velvet Was a Night, which is in a huge city with a huge political conflict. But even then, I was at first reluctant to tackle that because I was like, going back to the 1970s, boring. But I did because I eventually thought that it was sufficiently different from what I had done before to return there. But generally, I don't want to go back, and that's kind of one of my main issues, is that I get very tired very quickly, and I want to do something else and something completely different. So that is one of my issues. In speculative fiction, they normally want you to do a series, and I never wanted to do a series, so I had a little bit of trouble and jumped around editorials and all that kind of stuff for a while.
I'm laughing because I'm one of those people that love standalone speculative fiction. So I'm like, oh, thank you. There's just one book to read. That is so awesome. Let's see. That's not a question. We've got maybe a few more minutes. I have like one more wrap up thing to do, but I don't know if there's any comments that you guys anything you want to say, I know we're trying not to spoil stuff, which is really hard, but I don't know if there's anything else that you guys want to say before we start to wrap up. If not, that's fine.
I would just like to thank all the libraries and all the librarians that are listening in, watching. Aside from my wonderful parents, librarians are the ones that raised me. So thank you, folks.
I would echo the same thing. I'm deeply involved with our library here. It's such an incredible place, and this is the city's living room, where so many different amazing things happen, free programs and services. So I'm forever grateful for all of y'all, not just for keeping our books, but for everything that you do for all of our communities. It's incredible. Thank you for having me.
I would just like to echo that sentiment. Thank you guys so much for everything you do.
Thank you. I actually am the spokesperson for basically a horror library project promoting horror in libraries. And although Velvet Was a Night is not horror and we're talking about mysteries and thrillers, I do feel that having written horror is the sad cousin of every other genre. So I would like librarians that are listening right now to, think about diversifying and expanding your horror collection. It would help me and other people who are trying to promote horror a lot. And also, of course, expand your mystery and thriller collection with some of the wonderful authors that are here today. But I do feel that sadly, horror kind of gets the sad end of the stick. So there's a lot of stuff out there that is really great. And I think librarians can help customers who never thought they would like a genre to experiment for the first time. So that includes horror and mysteries and thrillers.
I'm laughing because I usually try to read one scary book a year, and it's because I'm such a huge punk that I do read one, but I'm so scared. But like I've really read some wonderful things, and so I encourage scaredy cats like myself to please try to read some horror.
Gabino Iglesias is a tremendous horror writer. For those of you who don't know, remember the name Gabino Iglesias. He's tremendous.
What's the first name again? I'm taking notes.
Oh, it was Gabino Iglesias.
Gabino.
Gabino.
Mm-hmm.
Gabino.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like horror thrillers and horrors are definitely, maybe if they're not like brother and sister, they're like related somehow, stepchildren, and I don't know how family trees work, but they're definitely related. And so it's like, I think it's just a slippery slope from thrillers down to, or not down to, up to horror. So I definitely encourage people who are scaredy cats like me, try it out. You might like it. You just might. Let's see, are there any? I got too much going on. I'm trying to see if there's any more questions. Oh, someone asked if everyone can say their favorite recent horror, if you have one. I'm trying to think of what mine is. Oh, Children of Chicago by Cynthia Pillaio. I interviewed her and she was wonderful, and the book is really scary and it definitely makes Chicago a place. So Children of Chicago by Cynthia Pillaio, P-E-L-A-Y-O. That's my favorite recently.
That's on my right at the top of my TBR list. I'm so excited for it. One that I read not all that long ago, queer horror, John Fram's The Brightlands, sort of like a Friday Night Lights, like just incredibly beautifully written, sweating bullets, scary murder. It's like murder mystery, crime fiction, but there's speculative, fearful elements, and it's just an amazing book. So, and it's a queer horror, which is just tremendous. So that's mine.
Coyote Songs.
Coyote Songs.
By Gabino Iglesias. Let me be honest with you. I scare easily. I'm a big guy. I'm over 6 feet. I'm over 250 pounds. I've seen a lot in my time, but I scare easily. And Gabino's work is tremendous, but it's also got incredible heart to it. Sometimes the heart may be in a jar, but he's fantastic.
I would recommend Falling Angel, because which was made into the movie Angel Heart. It's a noir mixed with supernatural elements, and so it's quite fun if you like those old-fashioned Humphrey Bogart kind of movies. But if you also like scary things, there's dark magic involved. But that's an old book. That's from 1978. If you want something with a more modern sensibility, Stephen Graham Jones has been doing a lot of good stuff, and he had a really good year last year with The Only Good Indians. And this year he has My Heart is a Chainsaw, I believe, coming out, which seems to be family in danger, maybe slasher horror film related. I haven't read it, but I've got the advanced review copy. But I did like Jones's previous book quite a bit, which was felt very much like classic Stephen King, but with a twist, with 4 indigenous young men who are being chased by some kind of supernatural entity that is out for revenge.
My friend, she's a librarian that does a lot of work with horror authors, and she told me that book was too scary for me, so now I have to read it to prove her wrong and also scare myself. I'm sure I won't regret that at all. I'm sure it'll be just fine. Let's see. Okay. We have just a few minutes left, so I will do, should I do my, let me see. I can do my, well, I just want to thank everybody. Let me say that first. This was wonderful. It's so good to be able to pick your brains. It sounds weird to ask you guys questions about your books. And I cannot wait to catch up with some of the books that Stephen has written. I cannot wait to read PJ's last book. I cannot wait to see what Nekesa is going to do. And Silvia, I already knew about your book, so I'm really excited to see what is going to happen next. Thank you guys so much for being here and present. And thank you everyone who watched and gave your suggestions and had questions. We really appreciate that stuff. Okay, so thank you so much to our wonderful speakers, and thank you everyone for attending today. This session will be archived and available soon in the live sessions area. Please remember to save the transcript now if you wish. We have a short break now, so if you haven't done so yet, make sure to visit the exhibit hall and the sponsors booth for giveaways, downloads, and resources. Don't miss our big summer read session at 3:30 Eastern, your final farewell. Thank you all again. This has been great.